All right. Well, thank you. Thank you, everyone who is coming in to be with us today. We have an exciting session for you today for this month's installment of In the Know. We have Peter Vanacore with us. Peter is the Executive Director of the Christian Association of Youth Mentoring. Peter, thank you so much for being with us. So excited to have you. Let me just share a little bit. Peter is not new to this in terms of mentoring. He's been mentoring for decades. Started his work in New York City, working with young people involved in the juvenile justice system and the child protective system. Moved to Massachusetts in the 90s, where he actually worked with Straight Ahead Ministries to help build out a national training program, and has just been doing extraordinary work across the country, helping to equip organizations to effectively work with young people. So, Peter, thank you for being with us, and thank you, Scott, for every month being my fearless co-host. But Peter, let's just jump right into it. We have people from all over the country that are tuned in today to learn more about how to work with young people, do's and don'ts. But just start us off with tell us a little bit about the work you do with Christian Association of Youth Mentoring.
First of all, just thanks for having me on. Thanks for the privilege of being with you, and especially just seeing Scott here and all the work you have done, all of you, in this field of juvenile justice. It's rare to see it, people who are sticking this long and being this effective. So our organization, the Christian Association of Youth Mentoring, we just call it CAYM, what we do is we help Christians follow the vision God has given them into developing mentoring in all sorts of areas, from juvenile justice to foster care, we have school-based mentoring, group home-based mentoring, to mentoring right in churches. And churches, sometimes they do it where they use half of it for outreach into the community and half to do it for discipleship within the church. So it's in a variety of places. And what we do is teach the best practices, which are evidence-based practices that are really have been verified for many decades through research. But we do that within a Christian context. We put that all within a biblical framework. So that's what we do. We work all across the country, and in quite a few other countries also.
Awesome, Peter. I don't know if you can see, but we have dozens of folks on from all over the country and our brothers and sisters in Canada. So welcome, and thank you to those of you who have joined us live on Zoom, and also those who will watch us afterwards and who are live on Facebook. Peter, in the work you've been doing with organizations, I know you've seen some effective kind of implementation of mentoring programs, and you've probably seen some stuff that just flat out hasn't worked. I'd love for you to share a little bit about what you've seen that has worked, but also share a little bit about what hasn't worked.
Yeah. Ministry that has worked has really, there's a few aspects to it. One is, when I mentioned those best practices, they follow a really pretty rigid regimen of being able to recruit, screen, train, supervise, and evaluate those relationships. And they really bring in a team of people to do that. The good news about mentoring with juvenile justice is that it can be very effective. And if you talk to just about every youth who grew up out of that system, who really thrived afterwards, they can point to a mentor that they had, whether that's a formal, but mostly an informal mentor. Someone like yourself or Scott or many of the people right here, probably most of the people right here on this program right now, have been mentors to kids. So every kid needs a mentor, and so it works in that way. What we see is also that they focus on the goals of the youth. Mentoring is really different with a juvenile offender than with a younger, or even not even a younger kid, but a kid from maybe more of a healthier background, but still maybe needy, is that they're not looking for the relationship. That's not the end product that they want out of it. They usually have goals in mind that they want to achieve. So they see mentoring as a means to an end that they have really defined in their minds, or really they want to define often in their minds, or refine. And so they look to a mentor in that capacity. How can that mentor bring me to this point? What we use for that, for helping mentors really who are in programs that are using best practices, we say, what are you looking for? And we want them to tap into the youth's potential. And that's just a quick acronym for first, that you have to establish trust. That is the most important first step in mentoring. And I could spend a lot of time talking about that. It's really a complex factor when you come in to it with the youth who have really, most of your youth have been through some sort of trauma in their life. And so when you do that, you establish that trust, but then that's the T in the TAP. The A is to help them achieve, identify their goals, help them to make some sort of accomplishment and move forward in life. And then P is people, and that youth who make it out of difficult circumstances need social capital. They need connections to people who can help them move on in life and thrive. And there are studies that show that that the difference between kids from under-resourced communities and a lot of other more middle-class or more affluent communities is often the difference between their ability to succeed comes down to what access they have to social capital. And mentors need to be a key part of that in connecting them to social capital. That could be anything from a job connection. It could be just a connection for education. But a lot of times it's just people who will support them. They need people who will encourage and really believe that they can succeed and stay with them when they fail, because that's going to happen. So, because it happens to all of us. So those are the factors. We talk about tapping into their potential and helping them to move forward in that way. And when mentors concentrate on that, they can usually make progress. But one other thing about that those aren't, you build trust and you help them achieve, and then you connect them to people. It happens all at the same time. You build trust by being consistent. That is the key to it. And then helping them achieve as you working through that. They as you work with them and they see you're interested in their goals and not your own goals, then you will and then they start to build trust. And then as you connect them to other people who can help them thrive, who can help them advance in life, then they build that trust even more. But sometimes to really get to a real close place of trust can take years with a lot of kids, years of consistency. And I will say this one last thing about that. It's not just consistency, it's pursuing. I was once in New York City on a panel with the former mayor of Philadelphia. And I mentioned that, a question was asked, what do you have to do in juvenile justice with mentoring? And the first thing out of my mouth is, you really have to pursue them in some way. And the mayor jumped in and he just went off on that and said, that is really the key. If you don't pursue kids, and he has been involved in that for all his years after being a mayor, that was really the thing he said was the difference between a successful mentor and one who wasn't successful.
Pete, thank you. And it's great to see you also. You played such a huge role here at Straight Ahead in developing a lot of our training. And with many people who are on working with justice involved youth, you talk about the going after them, not just being consistent, but being persistent. And I think often of this first mentor, relationship we had in Roxbury in 2000, and the volunteer, the mentor, 7 times going to pick up this kid, and every time he blew him off, and turned out to be there the whole time. And so the trust that takes a long time, and yet and the other side of it, loyalty steps in.
Yeah.
And we have been seeing a lot recently of kids that came up through the juvenile system 20, 25 years ago. In fact, I've run across 4 in the last 2 weeks who've reached out and now want to be involved. So there's that long-term fruit. But mentoring with volunteers in unstable communities with unstable kids is an enormous challenge. We have 8 reentry workers that are doing work in those communities, but you have seen in working with Youth for Christ and other programs, really mentoring work with this population. And maybe you can describe a place you've really seen it work well, and how that happened, and in some of the, as Eugene asked, some of the challenges that you have to overcome, just like you have to be persistent with these kids. The best laid plans of ministries come and go, but how we work through that, because I think pretty much the people who are on today are asking that, and how can this work in my context? And you've set this up a lot of places, so maybe speak to some places you've really seen it work and how that happened.
Yeah, there really some common factors, Scott, and some of the stuff is really what you teach in your programs. But mentoring by itself is not enough. It's one tool in there, and you can't go and think I'm going to give this kid a mentor and everything's going to work out well. That is a fallacy. What they need is really, you talk about 3 and we talk about sometimes 4 legs on a stool or a chair or a table to make it work for them. And what we see that a mentor can play a key role in that, and will play a key role in it usually. And but they also need access to a growth sector in their life, somewhere where they're growing, either they're earning. Well, I guess you could say the 2 things: earning and learning are the 2 things that go together. Where they're in a place where they are bringing in some money into their lives through some work, where they're learning something through it, and then looking beyond that. So once you establish that, looking beyond that to where does that lead me in my life? What next step in a career can I look forward to? They need that. And then another thing is they need a positive community. And one of the things that it talks about when in some of the research, and I can send anyone who wants, you can email me at peter@caym.org, and I can send you out some of the latest research that one of my board members, who is one of the key researchers, just sent me. But in that, you can see that that just that fact that you're in there and you're connecting with them, and is not enough if their main peer group is a bunch of kids like themselves. If they don't break out of that in some way, maybe not even break out, but have this other group where they are really in a more stable, thriving way, that can that they need that. And let me just say one other thing about that. Usually what we have seen is that community is often a group that's a little bit older than them. So it's usually if you try to match a kid in juvenile justice with a 17-year-old with a 17-year-old, his own, in a different phase in life, coming from a different community, different resources. They're really not peers in a lot of ways. And what we saw is that you match a 17-year-old, or you don't match in a sense, but they connect them with a group of early 20-year-olds or 20-year-olds. That is the group that they often feel connected with. They have more in common with that group than kids their own age, because they have they faced much more adversity and had to be much more resilient in different ways. And so those older ones are really are key in it. The other thing that, and Scott, you talk about this a lot, is there's some sort of accountability in there, whether that's through their probation, whether it's in some work school environment, but it's often we've seen in small groups in a church that they can connect to, that they can provide that.
That's really helpful, because that this is one component among many, and that's one of the advantages of justice involved youth, that there are systems in place around this youth. At least there should be caseworkers and other community resources, so that this mentor is not just put out there on their own. And I should finish that story about the mentor who showed up 7 times and the kid blew him off. After that 8th time, the loyalty was really won, and that relationship continued for the last I heard, it's been decades. But wow, for mentors to have, I guess, eyes wide open going into that the 1st, 4th, 5th, and 7th time weren't failures. They were just part of the process for this, that somebody who's, been hurt a lot is, lives with that mantra, I'll hurt you before you can hurt me. And sometimes we're really getting through at the point where we're feeling the most resistance and fear and pushback. And boy, hats off to those who have stayed in with youth through all of that ups and downs and what's involved in that. I really appreciate that. And how about for churches who have, you mentioned, the best place isn't a youth group. As I've always said, the girls in the youth group tend to like the bad boys, and we don't want to be a self-fulfilling prophecy for that. Many a youth pastor has lost their job trying to merge these ministries together, but
absolutely
group, but what churches have, what's been present in churches who've really been able to be a part of that process too? Because it's not just a mentor out of the church, but they're bringing them back hopefully into the life of this body.
Yeah, that is a really good question. The church, it really comes down to, is their focus on the grace and forgiveness and the power transforming of God, nature of God. And I know it sounds simplistic, but if they're really involved with building their, the ideal church where that's attracting people, and they want to have they're looking to build their own kingdom, it's not going to work. And so what we've seen is that churches that understand God's grace and are willing to pass it off to others in other ways. So often you see churches that are involved in foster care that will a lot of the youth in the foster care system are also involved in juvenile justice, and they are really able to understand those factors of how to really welcome someone into their church and make them feel like they're part of the church. And so when I talk about that positive community before, part of, Scott, what you and Hannah did in your home was that you created a new family for them, in a sense. And I think that's, that's the factor that church has to in some way become a family for them in that factor.
Awesome. Peter, we have some questions that have come in, and one of the questions is from Tim Hartledge. Tim, you're on mute, but I'd love for you to ask your question to Peter.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Well, Peter, it's good seeing you. We're from a past life. I used to be the general manager at Salem Radio in Louisville, Kentucky. So it's good.
Okay.
It's good to see you. My question is, I'm in Campbellsville, Kentucky now, and I might just be asking this question, not for an answer, but maybe just for some encouragement. But how do you deal with a community that doesn't want to see the injustice or the problems of the kids in the area? They don't want to do it. They want somebody else to do it. Other than school programs and organized sports, there's nothing for the inner city kids here. We have, obviously, with my experience coming out of West Louisville, I have seen and recognized some issues, but trying to get a community on board, especially when you're an outsider coming in, is pretty tough. Just wanting to know if you have any success stories or just anything good to share.
Yeah, the one thing, Tim, that I see is that there are people in every community that have God's heart for this. And what you have to do is find those people and connect with them. And you can do that. You're a former radio guy. So it's really getting the word out there to try to meet with them and gather them together, because most pastors, and it's not completely true, but most pastors are not really going to be really interested in opening their doors to these youth. And what we see very often is it is people in the pews who rise up and wake the church up to that. And that is not something that's going to happen overnight. It's going to take time, but you really need to build a really team of people to be able to reach out and change a community in that way. But start to find the people who share your heart, and really, it's the Lord's heart for these kids. Does that help you, Tim?
I think Tim can.
He's now off, but
yeah,
yeah,
off stage. But we did have another question that came in, Peter.
Sure.
Members of our network, both in the United States and abroad as well. There's someone from Alberta, Canada, wanted to know if they were interested in, and by the way, Tim says that was very helpful, in getting involved in Christian mentoring, and they're part of Canada. What advice would you give them?
Well, we work with several groups in Canada to help them develop mentoring, and we have a guy that really partners with us. He's in Winnipeg, but the key is to really find the resources to help you develop best practices. So when our organization comes into a community and works with an organization or a church there, we start with designing how the ministry should look. And we help them really understand the community. We go with them by bringing us in. It's bringing the outside expert in that gives them a little more credibility in getting started. I define the expert as anyone who travels more than 50 miles to speak to you. That's an expert. So but that is helpful. And then when we design it, we work on a strategic plan, and then we begin to teach the best practices, and then give you the tools for that, and then follow through with coaching you. So we coach groups for years as they implement and grow in their mentoring ministries, and then do an evaluation. It's really important to evaluate how effective you are and in applying those best practices and growing as you move along. In one of those research documents that I can send you, it talks about the programs in juvenile justice that show the best results are the ones who have stuck with it over years and learned as they grow. By working with our organization or others like we're the only one in the Christian realm who does this, but there are secular organizations that do this, that what it does, it helps you avoid the beginner mistakes that really are harmful. And when I say they're harmful, it's this. The thing that I didn't talk about mentoring is that mentoring, yes, can really help transform the lives of youth involved in the system. But mentoring that is done poorly, its studies show that it actually harms youth. And the biggest harm that we see is when an adult tells a youth who has been disappointed by adults their whole lives, these kids, they've mostly had negative interactions with adults. When an adult says, I'm committed to you, I'm going to be there for you, and fails to follow through or fails to really have the training and support to make that connection work, that is another dagger in an already fragile soul. And that's what we have to do. And that's why our organization stresses the best practices. Our three big words is we want mentoring to be safe, effective, and sustainable. Along with that research, I can send you a booklet on how to approach that. Email it to you.
Safe, effective, and sustainable.
Yes.
I appreciate it, Peter, just giving us the other side of it. You know, when I feel disrespected, my natural tendency is, you know, disrespect back, and that actually creates a lot more harm for, in the mind of the kid, more evidence of what they've already found to be true.
And Scott, those are really well-intentioned people. There's no one there. It's just, but if you're not doing the right things, you really end up harming.
Yeah. And, you know, as you've done a number of trainings too, like any dynamic, it goes through the forming and then the storming, you know, that's a part of it. And,
okay.
And before you have it reform and become effective. So this is not for the faint of heart. But I know you have some materials people can get started in on the everyyouth.org website. We have your mentoring manual for setting up this sort of thing. But are there things you might point people to within your website or specific places where they could follow up on some of what you said today that might be a first step before entering in with CAYM and one of your consultants to even design a program where they are?
Yeah, I think that the first step is to look at our website, caym.org, under our services, and see how we approach it. Now, how we approach it, it's the same format for no matter what kind of ministry you're involved in. But we will talk to anybody. There's no problem with us. We really, every week we're on the phone with people just asking questions, whether they want to use our services or not. That is fine with us. We will connect with you and talk to you and help you in any way to really follow God's calling.
And you've got a network of people. Well, now I learned in Canada, United States, how many folks are out there that are sort of available now to consult with or commiserate with or whatever we might.
That's a really good question. We're really working right now on making more of those connections with it. So we're developing a really more of, we're called an association, but we're really not much of an association. We have people connected with us, but they're not as much connected with each other. So we're working on that so that people can connect in a way that they will be able to know who is out there who can support them. But one of the things, Scott, that we do, and I think it's one of the best things that we do, is that we will, when we find you have a specific need or a desire, we will point you to a program that can help you in that. So I think I mentioned on the prayer call a couple of weeks ago that we quite a few years ago, we trained a ministry working with girls in who were sex trafficked in Indianapolis. They connected us just last year to another a program that's moving in that direction in Pennsylvania, and now we're working together to see that that program can start up. So in other words, we're taking that. So they went with our basic format. They've expanded on it, which is what every program does. And then now we're working together to help another program. And we're looking to see how we can do that throughout the whole country.
Peter, thank you so much. I'm looking at the comments in the chat and people are just very appreciative of the information you've shared. We just wanted to kind of whet folks' appetite. If you see in the chat, we both listed a link to the toolkit, how to start a mentoring program that Peter's organization developed. That's available on our website, everyyouth.org, under the resources page. Peter's organization very generously made that available to folks at no cost. And then the link to Peter's website, www.caym.org. Peter, thank you so much. I just want to give you 30 seconds, kind of last words before we round out today's session.
Yeah. You are, all of you are in one of the most difficult areas of ministry that you can enter into in the United States. And I understand your heart, been with you. And what I'm going to say is that if you really want to impact youth, and you're just impacting one or two yourself, you are mentoring them yourself, that is great. And if you want to add more people into that, to impact more kids, it's a detailed process, but we can work with you, or other people can work with you to help you develop that, so that every kid in you who's in the facilities you are working with, who's re-entering, can have someone in their lives who can help them really, what we hope is really embrace Christ and grow, but also just to learn to thrive and be able to use all the gifts that God has given them. So thank you, Eugene and Scott, for having me on.
Thank you, Peter.
Thank you. Thank you. And thank you to everyone who joined us today. We'll be back next month, third Thursday, 2 p.m. with another installment of In the Know. Peter, thank you so much. God bless you, everyone. Have a great afternoon.
Thanks, Kevin.